Yes, I do want to say that again. And that's an interesting mix that we have going. So hi, everyone who's watching this. We are here on a Wednesday night. We are gathered with a couple of tables of folks, and we're glad that you've joined us whenever you're joining us. We are, as I just shared with the group that's here, we are going to continue to follow the curriculum of the Animate program that we've been doing these last few months. We are going to move away a little bit from the curriculum itself. We're going to follow the topics, and between Christian, Sarah, and I, we're going to just use some of the pieces that are helpful and help kind of guide and direct the conversation around those topics. And as we leave the church and move into more of the practices of the faith, it'd be a great chance for us to think about, our faith and the components of our faith and what that looks like and how that actually is played out in our lives, how we can look for it, how we can experience it, and how we can share it with others. So we're glad that you're here, and we'll do the best job we can to kind of capture this with the microphone so you're aware of what we're doing. So we're going to start tonight with the video from Animate, and I think what it does is help set the tone and set the direction and a little bit larger picture about the church. And one of the things that it asked the question of is, so why go to church? And there's lots of good reasons, and if you talk to people, they'll give you 15 good reasons why they don't go to church if they don't go to church anymore. But also you run into those people that they have found community, have found an experience, and have a connection to a church, and they'll give you half a dozen reasons why you can't imagine missing church. Just this past Sunday, it's one of those events that happens that just, I think it should tickle everyone, but it certainly tickles a minister's heart. I had a couple of parents came up to me and introduced themselves to me. Now, they'd been in the service that I wasn't in, so I didn't get a chance to see them. So they introduced said that they came for the first time, and I said, "Oh, really? Well, what brought you here?" Our daughter. Our daughter's a part of the youth program here and came with a friend and loved what he did and said we should come and check it out. And I said, so what was your first experience? And they said, oh, we liked it. People were very welcoming. We loved the service. We loved what was talked about. It really encouraged us to think about their faith. I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know. Because everybody's asked me that same question. I'm like, I don't know which service they were in. So it could have been, yeah. So in terms of what their actual experience, I don't know the details of that. But I said, so what your experience was today, was that motivate you to come back? And they said, we have not really been around the church for a long time. And so this is a church that we're going to check out and see what our ongoing experience is. So yay for all of you who were probably part of the people that helped make those people feel welcome. And yay for some of the other programs that are happening in the life of this church that's drawing people in. So let me say a little prayer. We'll begin, and then we'll show the video, and then I have a couple of thoughts that I'd love for us to discuss. God, thanks again for Wednesday night. Thanks for this chance for us to gather and look at some scriptures that help us to think about the church, to think about some of the hurdles that we are facing in the world around us, and then to think about what that means for us and how we live out the good news of our faith, and we do that in community with one another. So bless our time together, we pray, in your name. Amen. All right.
My name is Bruce, and I'm here to talk a little bit about the church. I'm not talking about the church in the sense of the larger Christian community, but rather I want to address a fundamental question that many of us have. Why should we go to church? Or even more specifically, why would anyone choose to belong to and participate in any one congregation? Trust me, people both inside and outside of your congregation ask themselves this question all the time. Whether new to your church, a longtime member, or even the pastor, there are times when not being part of a church seems like the best option for expressing and living one's faith. Now, I've been pastoring churches for nearly 20 years, and I've served at all levels of my denomination, and I've seen good reasons why being part of a church does not seem like a very faithful use of our time and energy. The ways we try to mimic the culture of prosperity and corporate life, the hypocrisy that we exude around issues of poverty and social justice, and the emotional and sometimes physical damage we do to each other, all are good arguments to run away from a local congregation as fast as you can. And then there are these times when I will have a Sunday off. This is a day meant for rest and rejuvenation and a cup of coffee at my local cafe. One of my daughters meets me in the kitchen, sees that I'm not dressed in my church clothes, and pleads, "Dad, come on, can we please go to church?" And in all honesty, those are times when my inner child cries. Seriously, I think? You want to go to church? Why on earth would you want to do that? But in those few words, my children challenge me to remember why it's important to commit to being part of a local church, why we engage in the life of a specific gathering of faithful people, and the importance of worshiping God with others who are on a similar journey. When my children get up Sunday morning yearning to go and take their place in our gathered community called church, I'm forced to answer that question, why go to church? And off we go. Now, I know that I'm not alone in asking myself the question, why go to church? I'm willing to bet that perhaps some of you watching this right now, as you sit in a church classroom, you might have asked yourself this very question earlier today. I know there are so many images of church out there that it's confusing to think about why we come and what we expect from church. When people think of a particular church, here are some images that come to mind. The church as social club. It's a place where we kind of hang out, maybe network a little bit. The church as classroom, a place to learn about stuff. The church as a sporting event, a place to cheer each other on towards success. The church as theater, a place to be entertained by a dynamic speaker. The church as hospital, a place where wounded people heal each other. Sure enough, the church is at times each of these things. Each versions of the church have parts of what it means to be community, but none of these is what the church is really meant to be. The reason that none of these things is quite right is because in each, human beings and our needs are at the center. But the church is different. Because in the church, God is at the center. God is the protagonist. God is the reason we gather. Unlike a social club, the worth of a church is not solely measured by what it accomplishes. Unlike a classroom, church is not just about gaining an academic understanding of God. Unlike a sporting event, church is not a competition. Unlike a theater, church is not just about being an audience. And unlike a hospital, church is not just about healing our wounds. When I think about the church, the image that comes to mind is family. Now, I know that metaphor has some problems. One of them is that when churches call themselves family, we get this image of a warm, happy place filled with people who love each other. It's like the church as Pleasantville, but that's not the church. Like a real family, a church family is messy, it's difficult, and not always pretty, which is why I like the image of church as family. We didn't used to talk about messy families, but now we do. That's because the meaning and expression of family has changed. So the church, too, must rethink, redefine, and reimagine what it means to be church family. No longer can being a church family mean that there is one ideal form or structure that everyone should be striving for. No longer can being a church family demand that an individual or a group remain part of that family or remain silent when they experience abuse, spiritual, emotional, or physical. And no longer can being a church family mean exclusiveness, limiting acceptance only to those who are somehow born into the community. And no longer can being a church family mean we only care for ourselves, ignoring the larger global family and being driven by our own survival. Because family continues to be one of the most commonly used expressions of church, we must embrace the hard but genuine realities of what it means to be church family. We know that just as our own families are not perfect, we shouldn't expect for any church to be perfect. Church families struggle, they fight, and sometimes they drift apart. We also know that just as families don't all look alike, we should not expect all churches to look alike. Church families have different cultural realities, they have different understandings of how to be church, and often they have different expressions of the Christian faith. And just as we believe that our own family should be a place of unconditional love and acceptance, church family should be a place where all who enter experience the unconditional love and acceptance of Jesus, and ultimately grow into who God intends for each to become. It's that acceptance, that love, and that challenge to grow that keeps me coming back to the church. As I think back to my own childhood, who knew what I was to become? Like most, I made some bad choices in life, and if not for my church, who loved and accepted and challenged me and my family through it all, who knows who or where I would be today. So when my children meet me in the morning with that question, Dad, can we go to church? We go. Because despite the times that we fail to be the church that I want us to be, more often than not, it's a place where they will be loved, they will be accepted, and they will grow more and more into who God intends for each of them to become. The elephant in the room, of course, is that we all have issues with our families. There's someone who ticks us off, someone who makes us feel small or invisible, someone who hurts us. And certainly the church family can be as dysfunctional as any other family. So I wonder, how do we deal with that? What do we do with the pain that we cause each other? When we call the church a family, do we really mean it?
There was a time, excuse me, in the early 2000s where that notion of calling the church a family was really pushed hard up against. Like that, because of a lot that was coming out in the psychological world about some of the ways that we were thinking about families, some of the things that were coming out about families, and a lot about dysfunction, a lot about the struggles, a lot about pain, a lot about injury, a lot of those kinds of things. And to compare the church to a family, there was like, let's not do that. That's going to be not going to be helpful for the individual, but it's certainly going to be hard for the institution of the church as well. The idea of family is, as we are learning new skills and new understandings and kind of practical ways of making that comparison, it's kind of coming back in some of the reading and some of the writing that people are using. So he's kind of on that provocative edge as he's sharing, maybe it's time for us to think about how the church could be a family again. And as he discusses it, he talks about it not some romanticized notion or some place where we're hoping to get to that, you know, most families don't ever necessarily achieve. We grow and we change and we work at that and try to be the best families we can. But there's never going to be a place where we're going to arrive, and it's going to be that place where we can just settle in. It's going to be we're always going to be asking questions. There's always going to be messiness. There's always going to be challenges. So I heard somebody just the other day, they were talking to an older couple, and they said, so when do your kids get to that point where, and I didn't hear fill in the blank, it didn't really matter. And they said, well, I don't know. My kids are in their 40s, and they're not there yet. So I don't even know what the issue was, but it was this suggestion of, you know, as parents and as kids, and whatever age they are, you know, families are messy. So let me just start there. He says that's the best way for him as a guy who's been a pastor for a number of years and worked his way kind of through the spectrum of being a part of a church in a denomination. He started out as a local pastor, became kind of the head, I remember the term that he used, but really overseeing the whole, I guess he was the moderator, I don't know what he was. But he worked his way up, was kind of oversaw a number of churches, then oversaw the whole denomination. At one point, and he's saying, as he's talked to pastors and as he's thought about it himself, I think the story about his kids wanting to go to church is an older story that he's reminding himself of, and he knows is an accurate description for lots of people, lots of ministers, but also for people in their own homes. Let's talk about that for a second. Does it work for you to think about the church as a family? And if that's the case, is that a motivating thing for you? I'm more inclined to want to participate because I can use that model of family in a way that's helpful. Or that's even more difficult for me. I could put more restraints around my commitment to being a part of a church or deeply invested in a church if we're going to call it a family. Any thoughts about that? I will pass the mic around if people want to talk. Is it a helpful term? Yeah, go ahead.
I was surprised that he basically described the church. First, he says that God is the center, which makes it kind of different, but then he described the church as a regular old family with the dysfunctions and the challenges of any old family, as opposed to what might be different about about a church. I think of it as a community myself, a community of faith that we grow together, we learn together, we seek God's, will and involvement in our lives. Yeah.
Someone else. Helpful term, or is there a term that you'd rather use that's more helpful in terms of the way you might gather your thoughts around a community of faith? Yep.
I remember hearing somebody talk about father, so like God as a father, and somebody talking about how they didn't have a good relationship with the father. And so that was my first kind of eye open, because I love my parents. My dad was a great father, so God as a father was it was like a no-brainer. And so I kind of think the same way with families, and where families have a hierarchical setup already. There's parents that are in charge, and so in a way, family doesn't really work. Especially Elaine, as you pointed out, if God is the center, then what are are all the people children, and then who's in charge because somebody says, well, I heard from God, or so I do think family can be really troublesome.
To me, the word community is better than family.
You want to say why? Why do you think that?
I don't know, it just seems more open. It seems more expansive. Family seems a little ingrown to me.
You gonna say something? Anyone else? I'm coming.
I guess I'd say the community too, because family is mostly focused on taking care of the family, not so much outreach to other things. And I think at its best, a church takes care of its own, but it also is outward looking in a way that a family isn't.
Anyone else? Yeah, Tim.
I guess I don't really have a problem with it, but it just seems kind of exclusive to me as well. Like, if you want to join a family, you can be born into it or married into it or adopted into it, I guess. But it's like the couple that you were talking about that just showed up on Sunday. Like, that I think that would be a barrier to some people, that there's this family of people that I'm going to sign up to join, maybe. I don't know. So maybe it seems a little exclusive, I guess, to people that aren't in the family already.
I'll be the contrarian here. Because for one, I would start, whose house is it? Whose house is it? God's house. Church is God's house, right? Who's in your house? God's family, right? You can have community anywhere you go. You have community at school, community at work, community at the country club, community in the grocery store. There's something different about being here. It's a different community. So what makes it different is that we do view each other and treat each other through the love of God, which to me is what you bring, hopefully, in family, right? Go back to Adam and Eve. We're messed up as people. We have human conditions over the edge. That's true everywhere you go. So why wouldn't that be true here, right? But the difference is you're called to overlook some of those things here. You're called to have grace and forgiveness here. You're not called to do that in community. To me, that's the difference.
But if it's a faith community as opposed to a social community, there are expectations that God is the center of your community, whether he's the father of the community or whatever.
I think it's really important not to get hung up on semantics, though, right? Because semantics is an excuse not to do anything in life. Right.
Okay, I'm going to argue my own point. So I just remember during COVID what that felt like, just, not being able to be with other people and worship with other people. And I was talking to it recently, and it's weird, but to me it felt a lot like the first time I lived away from home and went away for college, and it was different, but there was like this deep yearning, like a homesickness, this is exciting, it's fun, it's different, and COVID wasn't exciting or fun, but there was like, I just want to go home, I just want to be with my family, I guess, and my community. And I felt that way a lot during COVID it was great. Everybody tried to have that, with virtual events and online events, but there was, with me at least, like this homesickness feeling of I just want to come back. so maybe it is a family. I don't know.
Oh, you're arguing against your own point.
You're truly a Renaissance man. Position and argue against it. I love it.
I was thinking about like some of the words that came to mind are like sojourning together, like as a group, and as you're like when you find a friend in kindergarten and you grow up together and you're like in your 40s and you still stay in touch on Facebook. It's like that idea of kind of like that this like friendship will go on forever kind of a thing, because I think because we are people that believe in heaven too, there's a sense of it's a community that also has a belief in the afterlife and the resurrection and things that are just different. Yeah, hope beyond the day to day. And so it's I think there's just something to picking up and moving for me at different places, going off to college and stuff like that, but finding other people that also have that hope and that sense of oh, we'll see you again, or maybe not, but but knowing we have a shared faith that I probably will see them again, and so there's something to that that's just really comforting and different. And I think that kind of reminds me of family too, is that your family's always your family, you can't unfamily your family. You can try, but it's still kind of a part of you. So, and then the other thing that comes to mind is I always think of my people. When I got divorced, I'm who are my people? Going through COVID and looking for work and feeling like I was ruined. I just am so grateful just to know that there are people that were looking out and looking out on me, and there are people from this church, and some of them I don't really talk to that much anymore, but at different times people have stepped in, and I being away from home and not growing up here, that has been family for me, being a transplant in Minnesota. So I don't know.
Somebody else want to make a comment?
I wished that he had asked his kids why they wanted to go to church. I thought it was really interesting that he didn't want to go, but they did, and it would have been maybe illuminating.
Because I've seen it a couple of times. He does suggest why they want to, because they're welcomed and they're accepted and they're cared for. Kind of some of the stuff that you were just talking about. That he is saying that they show up there and that they're celebrated and loved and encouraged and accepted. And so he doesn't ask his kids, but he's surmising that's part of the reasons. And they get donut holes. We got kids who show up because they get donut holes.
It's this is so different from my experience growing up. I was raised Catholic, and church to me meant going to worship God, and that was it. There was no social anything. We didn't have donut holes or coffee or even talking to anybody, except in the service where we would pass the peace. but it was only about worshiping God. That was it. And it stuck.
That's interesting. I'm always glad when I get to be reminded of those kinds of things, because it's so easy for me in my mind to think, okay, my experience is kind of the general experience, a little nuance here and there. But I didn't grow up in that church at all. I mean, I grew up Presbyterian at, from Steel Lake Baptist Church to Hope Presbyterian Church. I guess we were Baptist for a little while because my mother was Baptist. But there were potlucks, and there were Bible studies and vacation Bible schools and donuts, and I don't think there were donuts. Yeah, there were donuts. There was coffee and bars is what there was, and sometimes cookies. But there was so much more than that. Also, there was the call and invitation to worship, that those communities were pointing us towards our relationship with God and pointing us. But when you were saying that, I was thinking to myself, because I wanted to make a comment about what the discussion we were having here, but I don't want to lose what you said, because what if church was more operated like that? What if we didn't have all the other, I would say they're positive things, but distractions? That you showed up here, and there was one reason you showed up here, is because this was your chance to be refocused and be in awe and be focused on and celebrating God. And what would that do in terms of the way that we showed up? What would that do in terms of who would show up? What would that do? And I think the church today, and I'm going to come back to this idea about family and community, because I wrestled with it before you guys got here, is, the church that you grew up, the church that I grew up in, the church that we have today is very different. There's been a progression, and there's been some learning that's happened, and even in the Catholic Church.
Just saying, well, you have to remember that it's a sin if you didn't go to church. So they had that over us.
You could go to confession if you got there in time. Yeah. There were a lot of have-tos. Yeah. Which is interesting, because, I remember as an early youth pastor, David, you might remember some of this, you'd be interacting with kids of all different denominations, and there were a lot of Catholic kids that were involved in all the programs that I was involved with back in the day, before I got to this church, and there would be all those complaints that would come out, or derogatory things that all these things we have to do. And so I remember early on doing my own research and doing my own study, and I thought, how did it get to be that fact? Wouldn't it be awesome to say you could sit in a little booth with someone who was there just to hear the things that you were struggling with and challenged by, and then saying, there's a God that loves you and wants to forgive you if you're just willing to receive that forgiveness? How's that end up being a bad thing? And then they tell me their experiences. Well, the priest would keep asking until you got to the good stuff. And I'm like, oh, so it was a little bit embarrassing. Yeah, but or some of the other practices of our churches, they had good reasons for doing them, but then they become just these things that you do, and you have to do it, and if you don't, then you're bad, or you're punished, or you're ridiculed, or whatever it is. And so again, going back to the church, I want to go back to our conversation about the church and the idea that came out. One of you both said about community, and I think, and I appreciate your comment saying, if we get too close to the semantics of looking for that one word or that one idea that's going to capture it, I think the church gets smaller when we do that. And I think that's one of the great things about the church. It's bigger than us, because who's at the center? God's at the center. God is bigger than us. And so what God is doing is bigger than us, which should be a motivating factor for us to keep showing up and being a part of and learning and growing and expanding. And he says that a couple times in his video. He says, that's what separates this community apart from other communities. And remember, he went through the whole thing. He says, sometimes people think about the church as a social club. Sometimes they think about it as a classroom, a sporting event, a theater, a hospital. I think there was maybe one other. And he says it's none of those things, but it's all those things and so much more. So much more. some of those specifics that people go, I go there because it's my social place. I go there because, you know, I'm entertained in the positive sense of that, or I can go when I'm not feeling well and I get a sense of healing. It's all those things, but it's more. Those sometimes are just the steps that we use to be invitational. This is a place where you are. This is a need that you have. You can come and experience that and have some fulfillment there, but you can have so much more. Why? Because who's at the center of it is God. And I think it's also that one of those challenges that we all know as we've been on this journey of faith together is every time we get God into a place where it's fully understood and fully understandable and fully able to be communicated, then our God got too small in a real hurry, right? God is well beyond that. One of the things he also said in terms of the church is that the church needs to be a place where people can come and be loved, they can be accepted, and they can grow into the fullness of what God desires for them, which I love that last one especially. Not that we get to go and just rub the genie's lamp and get all of our needs met or have our prayers answered, but that we get to grow into the fullness of what God desires for us. A place to be loved, a place to be accepted, which are two different things, right? There's a sense of being loved, but there's a chance where you're a place where, you know, it's like you said, you're always going to have your family, right? You're always going to be your people. So there's a sense that you're always going to be loved, but there can be some things where you're not really accepting of them. They have a different opinion about something. They are differing in terms of the choices they make. So a place to be loved and accepted, and a place to grow into the fullness that God desires for us, that the Creator has purpose behind creation. You won't get that in other communities. So it can't just be a community. I think the point he was trying to say about the being the family is that he got a chance to kind of talk about, well, we all know how messy families can be, and churches are messy. If you're part of a church, you know how messy churches are. And so maybe that gets us closer to that. And then I think as we started talking, go, but that doesn't quite capture it. It doesn't quite get it. So, do you agree with what he says, that those would be some of the central themes of what separates a church from maybe other communities?
Well, and I think from what you said, because I was kind of thinking of that myself, not as well put, but the fact that, you know, we go to church because we're trying to grow and we're trying to get fed there. And that's not so much happening in most other communities, I don't think. They're not trying to help you grow and develop and whatever. They're just trying to kind of do whatever. I don't know.
Yeah. I know there's a thought there. So I saw the light bulb.
I have to reformulate it.
I worked for a while for a guy who was a little bit younger than me, and he's a small business owner, and is Jewish. And I love the fact that like he would have the rabbi come to his house, and they would do Bible study and stuff. And he had a really strong sense of like community, and I was just like so just. And he was really supportive of the fact that I went to church, and was like, yeah, like we liked that about each other because we both appreciated and valued like being a part of community. And I was thinking about how, like, what's the secret sauce about being a Christian, or like being a part of a Christian community. And I really think it is like when we're all kind of like a tuning fork. When you're listening to the same sound, like, and everybody's kind of listening to it, like, you can become more like in harmony. And I think there is something to like the message of the good news that like helps us as a community to kind of like focus in on having that reverence and like acceptance of God's love, and trying to let that change us and help us to be more that way towards one another. But then I think there really is like there is something about the Holy Spirit that helps us in our hearts to be able to do that. Because some of us are just totally tone deaf, but I think there's something else that is a part of that.
Yeah, faith community is different from a family in that you didn't choose the family, although these days sometimes we do make our own families. But basically, it's a commitment. In our church, we call it a covenant to be together. And then the other thing, I think what Jeff was saying is, and it's not just focused on ourselves, but it's reaching out to provide blessing to the broader community that may not be even a part of our community. So I think those are different.
Some of you might remember Daniel Harrell. One of the things he used to say quite often is that's what separates us from other organizations as the church, is that we can do more together than we can do on our own. I mean, no matter how much we can do on our own, gathered with another group of people, like-minded people going in the same direction towards some issues, concern, some focus in some way, we can do more, we can experience more, we can have more. And I thought that was one of those profound things that he shared several times, and I've thought of that many times, is that is one of the privileges of being a part of a faith community, is that I can do something, I can have a perspective about something, I can see something, I can be, but then to gather with other people doing it together expands that experience, expands my understanding of that, expands my perspective on that, and I get a chance to have some of that growth that you were talking about, that maybe we can't do in other circumstances. Go ahead, I'm coming. Michelle does this just so that I get my steps in.
Actually, that just made me think, that we can do more together than we could alone. And it made me think of Jesus saying, like, those people aren't my family, this is my family. And it wasn't there was no marriage, there was no children, it was these people and what they could do together, and why he didn't do his work alone either. And so in a way, family could be one of the words, but instead of like the semantics of it, it's more of like, what was Jesus actually like creating in that group?
Do you want to answer that question? That's great. I appreciate that. Other thoughts? Here, I'm coming.
There are a lot of organizations where you do things together that you couldn't do as an individual. The difference is that we've got the multiplying power of the Spirit in a faith community. But the idea of the tuning fork and listening to the choir, another image is a heavenly choir, as opposed to a community with many different voices, but all singing praise to God.
All singing the same song in harmony, as Suzanne just said. Yeah. What I'd love for us to do for a few minutes is, I chose 3 pieces of scripture for us to look at. Go figure. It's kind of a Bible study time. The first passage is a familiar passage, is Acts 2, and it's right after Pentecost, and it talks about as some of those first communities were gathering, and what that meant, what those communities looked like. And so I'd love for us to read that. And then the second passage is from 1 Corinthians 12, and it talks about the body and the differences, the different parts of the body. And then the third passage is just one verse. It's from John 15:5. Anybody know what it is? John 15:5. You all know it. I'm the vine, you are the branches. And just, I'd love for us to look at those 3 passages and think about them in the context of the church. So I'm going to give this table, this one, and I want you to look at John 15:5. I'm going to give you guys Acts 2, and I'm going to give you a lovely couple back there, the winner of the box on the display floor, 1 Corinthians 12. And what I want you to do is just look at that as a table and ask yourselves, what do we think that means? How does this piece of scripture inform us, and if in any way, about what the church is, what the church is called to, what the church offers an experience, where God is helping to lead the gathering community through this passage. So just take a couple minutes and look at that passage together if you could. And then discuss. Your Acts 2. Your Acts 2. And if you're at home, I would absolutely encourage you to look up Acts 2, 43 through 46. 1 Corinthians chapter 12, 12 through 21, and then John 15, 5. And ask yourself the question, how does this inform the church? How does this guide the church? Is there some information there that could help us to think about how we do church? Maybe just a couple more minutes to see a chance to think about it. If you guys want to talk at your table about that, you can.
It's not clear that they spent time in the temple, but they broke bread at home. Is that, so did they
Sticks out to me
bringing the whole
in this
group to
passage
their home?
This is a
I don't know why, but those who abide
kind of a sharing we never
I
do.
just think of like, as I've
You know, and a lot of
older with my
these other
siblings
two
living
things
in
I
different
think are kind of
states and
aspirational. We'd sort of
cousins,
like to be
whatever.
like that. I don't know that
it's
we'd
rare
like
that we
to
all
be
get
like
together.
that.
Not rare,
I
but
don't,
it doesn't.
well, I don't know that there are
Annually,
any examples of
But
that.
it's not really, when we're together, it's not
Well,
really what we're doing.
we do
don't
to a
take
certain
based on
extent,
any kind
but
of
not
activity.
to the full extent that they do. I mean, we do share, our donations, our mission, work,
Yeah, but we
our,
share a little bit, you know.
yeah, but not everything.
Being
Yeah,
together.
if we think
together.
we're tithing or
Abiding
something,
together,
10%,
And
that's a big step.
I don't,
you know.
I suppose if you were a very disciplined person,
All righty. Finish your thought.
Sunday morning to abide with the Lord, but there's something to that.
There are some communities, though, that actually do that.
What's the word
Yeah,
abide?
you've heard of, there's one in St. Paul, actually.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah, there are.
Be present,
To be part of?
to be part of, to be
share
present.
everything and
I wonder if there's a
sell all
bigger
the
meaning.
It's like a community, or a group of families. They might live in different places, but they do share everything. Yeah, it depends on where you live. These are in St. Paul. What are they called? I think they're called servants or something.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about this. One of the things that I heard, excuse me, one of these things I heard from the Acts 2 group over here, I heard the word, that's aspirational. And if you've read Acts 2, if you're looking online, if you haven't remembered, why don't you give us just a little summary of what was aspirational in this passage from Acts 2?
Here, you want to do this? You got the microphone there.
Nice try.
Well, it talks about awe came over everyone because many wonders and signs were being done through the apostles. All who believed were together and had all things in common. They would sell their possessions and goods and distribute the proceeds.
pretty amazing.
You know,
Yeah.
it's aspirational in one sense. It's very impressive, but I don't think it's a thing that we would really aspire to do. Because, no.
What would be at least a couple of the hurdles of us aspiring to do that?
Well, you'd have people, I presume, of widely differing levels of wealth. And so, the rich people are getting less than their share and the poor people are getting more than their share. And the human side of that, I think, would be very difficult. Now, Elaine said that there are places around here that do that. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Well,
The
there are
Vineyard
some
Church is a
community-
church that does that.
What was the
The
name?
Vineyard
Yeah,
Church
yeah.
is one of those.
There are communities that actually do that here, and I know of one in Georgia and other places. I mean, there are many communities that do that, but
Yeah.
it is probably unusual.
Well, the one thing that's interesting is if you think about that, because you go, oh, should that be the standard? Is that what the churches should be striving for? But we also have to remember those churches were maybe 3 or 4 house groups together. They were small, little, intimate neighborhood groups. And they were set up very different than the way we've done in the institutional church. And so what the church has done in terms of its stewardship is to say, here's the place where you're not selling anything probably. Maybe some people have done that in terms of how they've been a part of their stewardship of their church, but they're saying, here's the portion I'm going to give to the church for us to have some of those same experiences where we share our mission, where we were providing so community meals can happen and some of those kinds of things, or benevolence funds so that there's somebody in the group that needs something or they've lost their job, or those places where we can overlap and offer support and encouragement. So we've done it more as a practice as opposed to the kind of a lifestyle that they describe there.
But, we talk even about, tithing being
Aspirational.
aspirational.
It's a tough word.
I did a study 40 years ago or 30 years ago or some long time ago in this church where we estimated that, the giving was about maybe 2% of people's incomes. So, we weren't even close to tithing. And if we were, we can't even get to tithing, let alone really sharing.
Yeah.
In any larger sense.
Yeah, and I think on the positive side of it, you kind of go, oh, there's some level of goal to figure out how that we are participating as much as we are able to in the mission of the church, and I mean the greater church as I say that, certainly in terms of your own faith community as well. But on the other side, how does that translate to our actual life, and how do we translate that to the discipline of then trying to live that way? I remember my own household, when I was growing up, my mother had a second experience with the Lord, and it transformed her whole life. I mean, she couldn't pray without just weeping. She just had a voracious appetite for Scripture. She just tore up her Bible. I remember when after she died, I went to her Bible and was going to look for some key Bible verses so I thought, they would help me and guide me in what I was going to say. The only thing that wasn't highlighted was the ands, the thes, and the buts. I mean, everything else was highlighted. Everything was important to my mother. And one of the other things that she was committed to, and we were, middle-class family, she was committed to getting us to that 10% in terms of our stewardship and tithe, that she just felt that was the Lord had put it on her heart. And I remember the conversation my parents had, and those conversations weren't the usual kind of conversations when they were at odds with each other, because they would go into the bedroom and have those conversations. These would happen at the dinner table, because we're going to train our kids in the ways that the Lord's teaching us to go. I mean, I remember that. My sister and I remember that. My brother doesn't remember that, but we do. And I thought, that aspirational sense that she said, now that I want to live in whatever I deem as the faithfulness, and she tried to follow those things. So aspirational, different community, but maybe there's ways that we could kind of think about how that could look in terms of the way we take care of, look out for, support, enhance the lives of others. How about the 1 Corinthians 12 passage? Is there anything there that could inform us as the church, the community?
For this one, I think there's 2 pieces to it, 2 views of it, basically. One, there's oftentimes a thing of I have nothing to give to the church. And
What's this passage about? Remember? Can you just give a little highlight?
Yeah, this is the one about the church is one body. There's lots of members of the body. One can't be one without the other. And then, the hand can't say, no, I don't want the eye. The eye can't say, no, I don't want the hand. You all work together as one body.
Thanks.
And so to me, there's, like I said, 2 pieces of this. One, there's often times where people feel like they don't have anything to give to the church, and this is a reminder that everyone has something that they can give.
Beautiful.
Even if you're the pinky toe, you got something to give,
Beautiful.
right? Balance. And the second piece of this then also is, there's going to be people in the church that may rub you the wrong way. You may not like it. You may not like how they act. You may not like how, but they all belong here. Everyone belongs here. You cannot have a body without the stinky armpit. They're all got to be part of it.
Do you remember in the picture of the family they had a guy who was like a pirate?
Right.
How absurd! That was funny.
Right.
Yeah, stinky armpit.
So yeah, everyone has something to give. You also going to have to put up with all the other parts that give.
Yeah. It's interesting you're saying it that way because the one thought that I had, I don't know why I had this thought, but as I was choosing these scriptures earlier this week, I was thinking about that very thing, and I was thinking to myself of, those people that we are like, drive me crazy. Well, where's the place you're going to practice some of that benevolent love? Where's that practice? Where's that place where you're going to have that safe place to kind of try to interact and to grow into that fullness? Well, it's right there. It's right there. If I can't do it with that whom I'm in covenant relationship with, how in my world am I going to do it somewhere else where I don't have some of the safety net that community offers us and that covenant that guides us? So, very good point. Very good point. Anything else? Anything else from anyone else in your group?
We're a tight-lipped group.
So we gave the biggest task to this table, one verse. What's the John 15:5 passage?
I'll read the whole thing because it's one verse. It says, I am the vine, you are the branches. Those who abide in me and I in them bear much fruit, because apart from me you can do nothing. So we didn't have a whole lot of discussion, but what stuck out to me, and we chatted a little bit, was the second part, that those who abide in me and I in them bear much fruit. Abide is the verb in that sentence. And we talked a little bit about what does it mean to abide. It's an action. It's not just I believe. It's doing something with it. So it's like,
abide means act in accordance with.
right.
Another definition is to tolerate.
Right. So I googled.
Isn't that
it.
interesting?
I googled it, and I like. This isn't a definition, but it's an
Act in
explanation.
accordance.
It says it is active. Abiding in Christ is not a feeling or a belief, but something we do. It means to remain or stay and entails far more than the idea of continued belief.
Far more.
Yeah. So it's a
Yeah.
verb. It's doing something.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Go ahead. Oh, he's going to fist bump you. Awesome. Yeah, I love the fact, I don't know where along the line I picked up on that. Just I was interested in what the modern translation of abide was as well. And the fact that the second definition was tolerate. And when we first think of that word tolerate, yeah, it's like, how am I possible do that? Tolerate seems to be like, just barely crossing that line and just of acceptance where I'm tolerating. But you think about it, another sense of that word is we build up a tolerance so that as we keep working at it, then it gets easier. It gets more helpful. It's not just the kind of the threshold, but it's also I am struggling with you, but I'm tolerating you because I've made this promise, I've made this commitment to you, and the things that would maybe push me away and thwart me. So, we actually are already out of time. But one of the things he also said in the video, which I thought is helpful for us and I think this is helpful for us to think outside just the family kind of notion, is because families kind of end up with systems and orders, and this is the direction we go, and this is how we do it, and this is how we handle holidays, and this is how we handle money, and this is how with subjects we will talk about, some subjects we won't talk about. I mean, families have their way they operate, right? And that's where I think that image really becomes problematic in a hurry if we just think about it that way. Because one of the things he said towards the end of the video was that churches must be willing to, and he said three things, and they all began with re. Do you remember what they were? Churches need to be willing to rethink, redefine, and reimagine. Well, most families don't do that. Most communities don't do that. They gather around, this is the reason why they're a community, whether it's the grocery store or whatever it is. That's the community. That's why we're here. Why would we reimagine that? The church, again, because who's at the center of the church is the infinite God and a finite creation. And so for us to continue to pursue, that means rethinking, redefining at times that's in a definition that's helpful to keep us moving forward, and then reimagining how I'm kind of stuck this way, doing it this way, and it takes me this far. If I want to go further, I might have to rethink that. I might have to redefine it in some way that helps me to continue on the path. If that path takes me to here and I can't see what those next steps are, so I might have to back up a little bit. I might have to move over a little bit. I might have to change the direction in order to keep going on the path. And I thought that was one of the really helpful things in terms of thinking about what church is and can be and maybe is called to be, is who's at the center. So who's drawing us, who's inviting us, who's equipping us, who's creating an image that we can follow. And then as we translate it into our lives and into the culture currently, all along, I mean, think about all the reformations that have happened. That was rethinking, that was redefining, that was reimagining. How does the church stay relevant? How does this community continue to be a helpful presence in the community, the sweet perfume, the sweet fragrance of the faithfulness of God? How does it keep doing that? Well, it probably is going to take some of that rethinking, redefining. I think that's one of the great dangers of the church is we just go there and we worship. That's all we do. If you do anything else, you've wasted time and you're not faithful. And maybe you'll go to hell for that too. So there's been a lot of rethinking, a lot of redefining, a lot of reimagining, and that's helped the church continue to be as relevant it is and can be in the world today. And I think that's part of what we get to do together. And I think that the times that we have done it in this faith community, I think of the growth that's happened. I think of the energy that's created. I think of the momentum that it's created for us. So anyway, last thought, last comment. There's one. Yes.
So, I had a friend when I lived in Texas, and he had not gone to church for, God, I don't know how many years, 15, 20 years. And one Sunday morning, he opened up, he had gotten his family's old Bible. A little slip of paper came out, and it was a verse from Hebrews, so he said, well, I'll look it up. And it said, do not forsake the gathering of the people. And he went to church. He hasn't stopped since, and now he's even married to a pastor. And that verse
That's
is
taking that
always-
Bible verse serious.
He took it very seriously. But that verse, that story in that verse has always stuck with me. Do not forsake the gathering of the people. And so we are called by the Bible to be here.
And as that,
That's a good word for church.
And I think that's one reason why we're all here. We're people of a like mind. We're trying to, help each other and go where there's fruit. And so, say that again, the verse.
Do not forsake the gathering of the people.
And so we are the gathering of the people. And if you wanted to be one of those people, why wouldn't you go where other people are?
Yep.
Anyway.
That'd be a good theme verse.
Good summary statement of what we've been talking about.
so here, I appreciate that was all it took for the Spirit to move in this guy's life. I love that. Here's how that whole verse goes. I did, because I knew I wouldn't be able to quote it exactly, but I knew it even gets better from there. Because it's from Hebrews 10. And I said, not forsaking the assembling of others. Wait, I'll read it again. Not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together, as is the manner of some, but exhorting one another so much more as we see the day approaching. So don't give up on that, because the opportunity we have is to exhort and encourage and support each other as we look forward to our hope. And so when you're not feeling hopeful, I can offer you that hope. And when you're not feeling strong, I can help carry you. And when you are with abundance, you can share with me, and that's why we keep gathering together, because the body connected to the vine, connected to the source of the hope and the direction and the sense of who we are, that's going to help. That's going to help create some of those things where you go, that's aspirational. But all of a sudden you see that happen in somebody's life, and they do something that they never thought they could do before, and offer something that they never would get up at before. On and on and on. So,
We can talk this up a little bit. Now, what is the topic for next week that we can
prayer. We're going to talk about prayer and the practicality of prayer.
let's talk. Could you put that somewhere in something that's
It should have been there today. So yes, it will. If I have to write it myself, it will be there.
There was one little semi-mention of it in the bulletin about what was going on tonight,
Okay.
but not much. And then there was nothing online today. I think it's a miracle that all
This was awesome. Hey, you guys. Will you pray? I saw what you did there. Let me pray as we close. God, thanks for this discussion. Thanks for the things we got a chance to learn together and be reminded of as we think about this gathering of your people. We know it's because of your Spirit that gathers us, and it's your Spirit that guides us and helps create a community and a gathering of people that inspire and encourage and exhort each other in the journey. So that's why we come. That's why you invite us to come, so that we can feel loved, we can feel accepted, and that we can grow into the fullness that you desire for us. And we can be focused on you in that process, the center of the church, your house. Here we are. We pray in your name. Amen. Thanks for being with us. God bless you this week.
And it's got all this going for it. Why is church attendance declining across the country?
Yeah, it was interesting. I was at the table